Welcome to Breakout Startups, a podcast about the most prominent entrepreneurs and investors building the companies that transform our lives. My name is Tomer Federman. I'm an entrepreneur and an angel investor in early-stage enterprise and fintech startups. I have more than 15 years of experience in tech and previously was on the product side at Facebook, where I led product strategy and global growth of some of Facebook's major ad products. You can find me on Twitter at Tomer Federman. Before we begin, please note that this podcast is for informational purposes only. Nothing on the Breakout Startups podcast represents an investment or financial advice. Please do your own research. Also, if you like this episode of Breakout Startups, I'd really appreciate it if you can rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. This only takes a few seconds and helps get the word out. Okay, let's do this. Really excited to welcome to the show today John Linden, the co-founder and CEO of Mythical Games. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really am happy to be here.
To kick things off, John, what is Mythical Games?
Yeah, so Mythical Games is a gaming tech company, really focused around the principle of ownership in games and what that does to the gaming economy, honestly. And I think what we like to view ourselves, we've had a lot of deep experience in the gaming industry, and we're using things like blockchain and some of these new concepts to really kind of change how ownership works in games and bringing players and content creators directly into the transaction. And we believe it's going to open up just all types of new design principles of how video games can be made that we think will ultimately kind of dominate games over time.
That's great. So you are a gaming studio, right? You actually go and develop these games.
We do. So our background is we've made a lot of games ourselves. So I was formerly a studio head at Activision. So I worked on the Call of Duty franchise. We worked on about 4 of the Call of Duties on the development side. So we were actually involved in kind of making the game. And then I had my own game studio called Seismic Games. There was a partnership with a couple other founders as well. And we built, it was mostly a mobile game studio. So we built a game called Marvel Strike Force with Fox. And that game, did incredibly well. It's still, I think, a top 25 mobile game these days. And we ended up selling that company to Niantic. So we've had a lot of experience on the game development side. Mythical Games is a little bit more of a platform at the essence. So we really have this kind of economic engine we've been building to provide the ownership and provide all these new kind of utility of how to build games. But we also we're partnering with studios to build games. So we do have a game of our own called Blanco's Block Party that we've been working with a studio out of the UK to help us build.
Yeah, so you both develop your own independent games and then you also develop games for studios.
That's right. So, well, we build our own games that use our tech. So we have one game right now, and we'll probably do another game in the next couple of years. We're not trying to be prolific on the games we do. We want to bring out games that we think can really bring these concept of ownership to the mass market in a very unique and kind of positive way. So those are the games we do ourselves. Outside of that, we're actually looking at licensing our technology to other big game studios. So we're kind of focused on the bigger games out there, kind of the well-known games of how they can kind of use this palette of tools to bring this new economy into their games as well.
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about that for a second, John. So why do big gaming studios need to come to you to develop their games? What is it about your technology that's different than what they're doing?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that what's interesting about game studios in general is honestly, game studios are trying to do so much and they're always trying to move the needle. There's so many pieces behind a video game, right? From networking stacks to gameplay engines, physics engines, audio engines, animation systems, art pipelines, all of these amazing pieces that go into making a video game. So I think honestly, studios are always looking for ways to outsource. And in fact, if you look at most big video games a long time ago used to have their own game engines. They would all build their own entire game engines because that was the way they could uniquely get their vision to the consumer, right? But what's happened these days is most games now are going to either Unity or Unreal because those tools now can be outsourced and they can now focus on other aspects of their game. So that's kind of an important concept around how game studios seem to work. And they do the same thing with physics engines or audio pipelines or network stacks, things like that. So what we're doing is we're basically looking at how can we provide all this basic kind of like, so we call it an engine. It's really kind of this platform around the economy, right? And there's a lot of things that go into that. And so one thing we kind of joke about is we love video games, but we don't love them enough to go to jail over, right? So we want to basically make sure that we've attached all the regulatory aspects, right? Which anytime you start having ownership in games, there's new regulatory things to think about, right? And I think that's where we are really excelling, is that we've spent now 2 years working with regulatory agencies. So we worked with each individual state in the United States. We worked with the EU countries. We worked with most of the APAC. And we're starting to work with a lot of South American countries now to make sure that we're also having this base concept of regulated ownership, right? So the players can actually buy and sell, but do it in a way that follows kind of country law, right? Does that make sense in terms of kind of?
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that I always find especially fascinating about the gaming industry is I think it's one of the few industries where you tend to see the bigger players outsource a lot of the work, right? Like you said, big gaming studios are looking to outsource probably even more than they do right now. I think in pretty much every other industry, typically you see, the Googles of the world and so forth looking to acquire and bring more and more, functionalities and capabilities in-house, while in gaming it tends to work quite differently.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think you see a lot of these companies that kind of play Switzerland, right? They stay pretty independent for a long time because they're just providing core tech that applies to a lot of game studios. And that's kind of the big thing we're looking at. So it's not only just the regulatory side as well, it's also the concept of having these secondary markets, right? So if you allow players to buy and sell, then you end up having two economies, right? You have the primary economy, which is this nearly a $200 billion global industry now. It's been growing at just a rapid pace in terms of the primary sales. You buy a consumer buying items from the game, they're buying them from the game developer themselves. But then as soon as you have the concept of ownership, you end up having this secondary economy, this secondary marketplace where players can buy and sell. And honestly, the tech behind that is to create an efficient marketplace and think about things around, honestly, everything from money laundering to fraud to efficient, market making. There's a lot of core non-gaming principles there that require a lot of technology. So I think that's again why we're looking at building this engine, is building this tech and building the marketplace and the regulatory side with a heavy game development perspective. We think is going to be a very interesting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really exciting. So let's talk about that a bit more for a sec. So why is player ownership so important in the gaming space, John? Can you talk more about that and how it typically worked as opposed to what you're doing right now?
Definitely. So, I mean, honestly, if you look at, again, the primary market, it's a big market, right? There's $200 billion spent. I'm kind of rounding up. It's probably going to be about 180, 185 this year, but it's ahead of schedule, right? It keeps growing faster than analysts even predict. So we're closing in on 200 billion. And if you think about it, what people are buying right now is that's not really a tangible asset. It's a $200 billion of intangible assets. And kind of in other words, players are buying $200 billion of personal satisfaction, right? Because you don't have any ownership when you're done with it. You're really, it's an entertainment type product. And we think that's really awesome. And we love that. And we spend a lot of that money ourselves. But what we found is that, kind of thinking about the principles of this is that if you can suddenly turn that intangible asset into a potentially tangible asset for a player, it kind of changes a lot of things for them, right? So one, it kind of changes their mindset in terms of, there's no buyer's remorse. You could always sell it later, right? And this is not necessarily a play to get rich quick in video games. That's not really what we're in it for. What we're in it for is to start letting new game economies come out of that, right? So there's a lot of stakeholders now in the world, right? It's no longer just the gaming industry was primarily game studio, game publisher, consumer, right? It was kind of three parties in that transaction. These days, you have so many more stakeholders that are getting involved. You have brands, right? So you have big brands out there that are wanting to reach their audience within video game worlds. You have esports teams, right, that are being competitive and producing content for their, kind of their affiliation. You have influencers, both celebrity influencers that might want to reach their audience in a video game environment as well, like the brands, as well as these gaming influencers. People like Ninja become, global stars because they have this tremendous audience of and building content as well. So you have all these different groups, and then you also have other groups like artists, artists from street art, or artists in our case, we're working with vinyl toy artists. These make vinyl toys for a living, and we're giving them a new ecosystem to produce art and contribute into. So as you get all of these stakeholders combined, and you kind of start combining that with the ability for players themselves to become content creators, you kind of need an environment like this for people to kind of start having a new way of how you think about games and what that means, right? So we think there's going to be some really interesting opportunities to where players can become entrepreneurial in games themselves, and they're already spending so much time in these worlds. We love the idea of kind of bringing some of that back to the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on that briefly earlier. So I was always curious about player ownership in games, right? And how you can democratize that, which sounds like is exactly what you guys are doing. And one of the pushbacks I always got, and I'm just curious how you're addressing that, is that it's an opening for money laundering, like you said earlier, right? And if we really give people complete ownership over these digital assets that they buy via games, then potentially they might trade drugs and so forth using these platforms. How are you addressing that, and how do you make sure that it's not an opening for illegal activity?
No, I think that's a great question. Yeah, and I think honestly, there has been a lot of that in the past, and even what's really fascinating, Summer, is that players find a way to sell, right? And what you see is you have billions of dollars spent on things like eBay or just gray markets that pop up from time to time. And I think players are finding ways to do this. The problem is that it's fraught with money laundering and fraud, and you don't know as a consumer if you buy an asset there if you're ever going to see it, right? Did I just lose my money and get and because it's not a legitimate transaction in the game, right? On the other side, frankly, you have the game developers that kind of hate those because one, it's kind of bypassing the way they design their economy in the game. So it can really add a lot of problems to the game of people either shortcutting that experience or just doing things that could cause hyperinflation in games and things like that and kind of destroy the game for the general populace, right? So we've seen a lot of that already happen. What we think is interesting about the money laundering is kind of goes back to why game companies won't all build it themselves. There's a lot to do with that, right? There's things like KYC, AML. So we're working with companies around identifying that. We're building out systems that allow game companies to kind of specify levels of selling. So maybe you step it up with tiers. So you kind of have this flexibility between making it very easy for consumers to participate, but also protecting consumers and protecting money laundering as you go. So maybe there's a tiered step up in terms of how much you can sell versus how much information you have to give to kind of clear that you're legit, right? Things like that are all go into that engine. And then on top of that, we haven't announced it yet, but we're working with a large financial organization. So this is a company that it's a very household name, but they're kind of working with us to get into the gaming space using their technology for financial transactions. And we're applying that to that same concept of digital asset transactions. And what that allows you to do is it starts allowing you to look at irregular trading patterns, right? So just like you look at in a stock exchange or a commodities exchange, they can help detect irregular trading patterns. So there's all these types of things that we've been doing. And because we're focused solely on this concept, we can really go deep in this where another game company might not be able to afford the time or effort or cost, honestly, of kind of going deep around these topics. So we're definitely focused heavily on these topics.
That's really interesting. So you're applying basically best practices from completely different industries
to what
you're doing in order to identify and prevent fraud and illegal activity.
And I think that's exciting too. I think, like I said, I think you're exactly right. We're lifting a lot of concepts and frankly, a lot of people from financial trading organizations. We're looking at things like ticketing organizations, groups that have been selling tickets for live events, right? They have a lot of really fascinating practices that can be applied into this. We're also looking at things like the sneakerhead culture, right? In terms of like how are high-end fashion brands selling out items in 15 minutes, right? It's about scarcity principles and how do you bring that into the world of gaming that really hasn't seen that type of economy before. So it really is kind of pulling best practices from people that are doing it really well in a lot of different industries right now. So that makes it very interesting as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you talk a bit, John, about the business model? Like, how do you monetize?
Definitely, yeah. So obviously with our first game, we have this game called Blanco's Block Party. And that's our first game that's coming out. It's a kind of a mass market game. We put, we own the game, and we've it's built on our engine. And I say an engine, I mean economic engine, not necessarily game engine. We're using a standard game engine, but we built our economic engine on top of that. That game kind of monetizes very much like a traditional game, right? So we get a primary economy, but we are also building a lot of those concepts. So the secondary economy is very prevalent in the game, right? So players can actually participate, content creators can participate in a pretty big way. So we love that concept because we can pull all those levers, and frankly, we can learn a lot by operating our own game on the technology. Our core business over time is going to be licensing that tech out to other big game studios. And we've been in conversations with probably 7 or 8 games at this point. And it's early days, to be real honest. We're still kind of figuring it out with everybody. But we're kind of we're working to bring, our goal is to bring this tech into some of the biggest games in the world. And that's where I think the concepts get really exciting for not just us, obviously, because we get a nice cut of everything, which is awesome. But it becomes very interesting for game developers because they have a new revenue stream that can be very, very sizable, right? As well as it starts becoming really fascinating for all of these, what we think will become millions of content creators over time, because they have more, every time we bring out another game with a tech, they have a new opportunity to sell their craft, right? Whether it's their brand, their influence, or their art, or whatever it is, right? It just gives more opportunities for the ecosystem.
Do you get any pushbacks or I guess concerns around if I'm running a gaming studio? I mean, I do lose a certain amount of control by allowing people who are playing the game we developed to now trade it on a secondary market. I guess that's a very novel concept, but I wonder, how do you how do you communicate the value proposition, explain all the advantages that you just talked about, as opposed to being used to the way things work right now?
No, that's a great question. So I'd say there's kind of 2 main things right now. One is that it's not a one size fits all type model, right? And I think that's honestly, it's what I love when you have a concept of an engine or a SaaS type offering, that you can go to 5 different game developers, big game developers that might have, $100 million or $1 billion games. And you can talk to them about the concept, and they come up with different utilizations of how it would fit with their game. Those are the things I get really excited about. And so I think that's the first thing, is I think game developers will use it in different ways, right? Some of them might cater to esports. Some of them might be trying to get to more of a controlled UGC. Some of them might just be trying to create, ways for brands to interact with that game and kind of lower their marketing costs, right? So there's a lot of different use cases, but they're all principally based on the same concept, right? So I think that's the first step. The other step we do, and this is the part that we've gotten a lot of support, and obviously the content creators get very excited, is the way we've kind of built this is that anytime a transaction happens, whether it happens in our game, or frankly, if it happens in another third-party marketplace, right? And we built the tech so that it can really be open, right? We can an item could sell in a video game, it could sell on the web, it could sell in a marketplace that somebody else owns. And anytime that transaction happens, we can take a fee out of that. And when we take a fee out of that, that fee goes back to the game developer. It can also be split with the content creator. It can be split with the partners in terms of like where, was it on the Xbox and then it sold on to, whatever, Google or something like that. So you can really kind of cut that fee down. So what ends up happening now is game developers do have more control. They can really kind of build it however they feel the need to, right? So it could be fully curated. It could be fully internal. So it's just a couple partnerships that they're bringing out from time to time, but they want to give that back. And then what'll happen is it starts driving true residuals for the first time in games, right? So if I have an item, let's say I'll just make up something here. I'm Ninja, right? So I'll use him because he's the easiest one to know in the gaming industry. So if I'm Ninja and I create an asset in the game, and let's say I put it into, I do a deal with Fortnite, which he's done, he's going to get paid kind of one time or kind of a lump sum for his contribution, right? And with this new engine, what can happen is he can get paid up front for whatever sells. But let's say those items, let's say he sells 10,000 items to 10 million players, right? So it's a limited edition item. You have 10,000 of them. 6 months later, the value of those to consumers could be hundreds or even thousands of dollars a piece, right? And what happens is in a normal game or in a gray market, the game developer is not getting a cut of that future value. and neither is the content creator. But with the tech and the way we're kind of using this blockchain to track everything, he gets a cut no matter what it happens. So he could end up finding that the residual over the next 4 years of players trading that back and forth could actually make a lot more money than even the upfront sale. So it starts really showing the value back to the content creators to their contributions in a true way.
Can you talk a bit about how many users you have?
Yeah, so we're still early. So we haven't the game actually. We just actually recently announced that the game is going into beta on November 17th. So we've done alpha tests. We've had players in the game. We've been testing the game for quite a while now. But the first those have been mostly gameplay tests, right? Like, do they like the game? Does the game make sense? How do those things work? And so now what we're kind of moving towards is, okay, let's get the game into players' hands with a real economy. So that's going to be happening November 17th. We do have founder packs on sale. And it's kind of an interesting concept around ownership in games and players that have the ability to eventually be able to sell these items. You can sell items before the game comes out, right? Because they own these items. And so we've actually seen now with the founders packs out, there's a lot of people now that are transacting even before the game's out. And so what will happen now is the game will come out November 17th. We will start bringing a lot of players into that game. It's coming out on PC into a beta, and then we'll kind of have additional milestones from there. So we're seeing transactions, but we will soon see them actually in the game through the beta.
Got it. And what about the platform?
So the platform is operating behind the scenes. So we do have that all working. And we like I said, we've actually, as of now, we have assets that are actually tokenized. So every asset that's been purchased in that pre-sale is tokenized. It's numbered, it's serialized, and it's sitting on our own blockchain right now. So it is kind of waiting for players to go into the game. And when they go into the game that first day, their items they've already purchased will be sitting there waiting for them. And at that point, so that's the first step. And then we'll introduce abilities to sell. And we're going to kind of roll this out in pieces in terms of the ability to sell. Because again, the real concept is you want to have an efficient marketplace to truly make it work, right? So we'll do kind of a series of tests and kind of supply and demand to bring more and more sellers and buyers into that secondary market with the game.
Right. And for listeners who might not be familiar with it, what do you consider a tokenized asset?
Yes. So a tokenized asset, basically what we're doing is our engine basically transacts still in real currency, right? So if a player owns an asset and they say, hey, I want to sell this for $50 US, and it sells, they're going to get a portion of that $50 US, right? So minus the transaction fee from that sale, they're going to get the balance of that in real money. Same thing could be applied to euros or yen or kind of whatever currency it is, but it's actually taking place in actual real fiat currency. However, we are using the blockchain technology behind the scenes to really track that, right? So everything's written to a blockchain. That basically provides us with transparency. We can decentralize that more and more over time, and it gives us gives kind of a trust and transparency in this immutable ledger technology to one, make sure that the transfers and all that are very secure, and we have a strong mechanism to make that happen, but also to frankly provide a very strong audit trail, right? So eventually, if you have millions of stakeholders against billions of transactions, you can let a Marvel or a Nike or whatever brand, they can query the blockchain themselves and see absolutely every single transaction that occurred, right? And that's where that section is live. That process is being tokenized. So literally, we wanted from the very first character in our game ever sold, we wanted to make sure that was recorded in this kind of immutable ledger tech, right?
Yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, what I really like about that is you're taking this piece of technology that, a lot of folks are talking about, and you're applying some real use cases for it beyond just what we typically see, speculative nature of trading different.
The beautiful thing about blockchain is it's really built around owner. I mean, the concepts and principles of blockchain are trust and transparency and all that. So it's built around the same concepts that you want to bring out. So I get the question a lot around, do you need blockchain right now to make this happen? Not technically. We technically don't. We could probably build a centralized market if we wanted to and have all that going. But where we believe now is that as you get into hundreds of thousands or millions of stakeholders, and again, into hundreds of millions or billions of transactions, we think the blockchain, even though it's a little bit of overhead initially, we really do think it's great long-term for the health of the ecosystem. And we think that's kind of our contribution. Again, I think back to blockchain. I think, to be really honest, I think we're trying to shift gaming, but we want to make sure it's very understanding to consumers. It's understanding to game developers, but it's also using blockchain, right? So we have kind of this challenge to where we want to make sure it's great for people that love blockchain, but it's also great for the general consumer, right?
Right.
I think it's kind of an ongoing battle a little bit to make sure we kind of follow that very tight, fine line to make sure it caters to both.
Yeah. And I think that's a challenge that's pretty common for a lot of teams that are building on top of blockchain, just because, a lot of folks more broadly beyond the blockchain bubble don't necessarily fully understand the advantages of it, which leads to that question you just mentioned about why are you building on top of blockchain to begin with. How are you thinking about getting the word out and, making sure that folks are aware of your game once you launch it in November? Do you have a marketing budget in place?
We do. We have a pretty big marketing budget. We have a very experienced team that's from the game industry, and we've been quickly catching them up on blockchain. And what's really exciting about this company, Tomer, is that we have deep game knowledge, but everybody at the company has built games, right? So we're not necessarily trying to build, we're not in it to just build another game. What we're all in it to do is we all see the ability and importance to kind of bring this new concept to market. So what I love is that we have people from our, PR team or user acquisition team to our engineering team to our, whatever, like they all generally have a deep knowledge of gaming in some fashion, but we've really been kind of getting everybody up to speed on the blockchain side. So again, I think it's really exciting on that. And from a marketing perspective, what's great is because we have gone with kind of traditional game first, you'll see a lot of things about blankos out there that you'll never hear about blockchain, right? Because you don't really need to talk about it. You just need to talk about what blockchain brings to the player, right? It's basically, oh my God, you can have this asset now. You can level them up. You can change them. You can customize them, and then you can sell them for real money. That's what the consumer needs to know. We don't really talk a lot about blockchain to that audience. Now, there's other people that are very advanced in blockchain, and we'll share a little bit more about what we're doing or what that means to them. But that's kind of one of the key things. And what that's resulted into is, for example, we kind of announced the gameplay of the game in June, and we did it with IGN. We did it with PC Gamer. And I think we're probably the first big game. I don't know of another one out right now that is getting that mainstream press, right? So we're able to market the game through the mainstream because it's not a blockchain game, so to speak, right? It's a game that uses blockchain behind the scenes. So that really helps out with marketing. And we can follow a lot of the marketing paths that we know very, very well on how to market a game without having to kind of go down this technical path of blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And, as an investor, right, whenever I talk with entrepreneurs in the blockchain space, what I always tell them is, talk about challenges and the problems that your users are facing that you're addressing. And how do you do that, and which sort of technology you're using behind the scenes? I'm not sure they care so much, right?
They don't care.
I was give the example of Uber, right? You press a button and 3 minutes later, the car arrives. How do they do that exactly behind the scenes? Do you really care as a user?
I love that you brought that up. And I've used a similar example. My example is kind of AWS cloud computing, right? No one cares where you're hosting your cloud, the cloud, or which cloud you're using, or whether it's AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. They care about it working and providing them fast, reliable. And I think honestly, it's one of the challenges with blockchain is that if you went to a website and you had to first go get an AWS account as a consumer, and then every single time you wanted to go and add an item to your shopping cart, you had to go back to AWS and authenticate that as a consumer. E-commerce wouldn't be what it is today, right? So really, I really view, a lot of people view blockchain as kind of this way of life, and it's awesome. And I think it's exciting because anything that brings that type of emotion can show how changing it can be. But at the end of the day, blockchain is a technology, right? And it's a technology that we need to make sure is usable as a technology rather than kind of this way of life. So I think we try and view it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm as bullish about blockchain as you can get, and I'm super excited, obviously, about the industry as a whole. But I think it's really important to not lose sight of blockchain just enables a bunch of new use cases that you couldn't solve for them before, right? Like the ability to transact peer-to-peer without a middleman, and for it to be fully secure. You talked about the audit trail and so forth. But at the end of the day, these are problems, and you're solving them, and it's important kind of not to lose sight of that and talk about the technology itself.
I think you're exactly right. I love your analogy with Uber. I think that's perfect. That's exactly right. Is that I mean, and it's challenging, because like I said, I view myself as a fairly advanced blockchain cryptocurrency user. Right. I've traded a lot. I have enough that I track it and do tax reports and all that type of stuff. So I definitely do more than just like a Coinbase account. But even knowing exactly what's happening behind the scenes, I still have challenges sometimes where if I were to send you $100 in Bitcoin, I'll hold my breath for about 30 seconds to make sure it goes through, right?
Right.
And the fact that I do that, it definitely means that, an average consumer that might not care about blockchain or trading cryptocurrency, they're going to have no idea what that means. Like, what do you mean it didn't show up? What do you mean I need to know what a private key is? What do you mean if I lose that, somebody can take everything I own, right? It's just, it has to get friendlier from the consumer side. And I think until then, there's a lot of things we can do in terms of, custodial accounts until you're advanced and really trying to apply it behind the scenes as a tech layer, right? Now again, I think there'll be a lot of blockchain people that are upset at me because of that, because there are a lot of principles and people that want to have ownership of their keys. They feel that's the advantage of blockchain is there's nobody touching my keys. And that's awesome. And we're not against that. We just think that if you looked at it, we kind of did this in free to play games as well, to where 95% of a free to play game, they just play the game. 5% actually interact and buy something, right? But 95% just play the game. I think the same thing is going to happen in blockchain, is that if you have a player-owned economy, 95% of the people are just going to play the game because that's what they're used to. That 5% of the ones that actually will start interacting in a bigger way. And frankly, there's a subset of that that's going to care about their private keys. And we're working at ways to say, okay, if you're a really, really advanced user, then yeah, well, let's write it to a mainnet. Let's put it into your account. But I think that's going to be the minority versus the majority for quite a long time still.
If someone can solve that 30-second scare that you talk about, please let me know, right? Like, would love to talk with you if you're working on something to solve that.
I think there's actually some really interesting announcements too. I mean, I think, obviously seeing Square Cash App get into the space and people are now owning, blockchain, but they're not dealing with private keys and all that. A lot of people hate that model. A lot of people that are pure blockchain don't like that model. And I know, PayPal just announced recently that they're getting into the space too, and people are very, very upset that are hardcore. Most people are like, "Oh my God, this is great! 300 million people are going to be introduced to the concept of holding and holding a digital currency, right?" Which they've kind of already done. It's just now digital currency backed by blockchain, right? I mean, PayPal is a digital currency essentially behind the scenes, right? So I think. But what's interesting is the core blockchain group kind of hate on it. They're like, "Yeah, but they didn't do this, and I can't transfer it to this, and I can't own my own keys." You're right. But overall, I think it's great steps for the industry in general, right? As you get more people comfortable, then more people will care about some of the more advanced and frankly exciting parts of blockchain, right? So it's all baby steps, I think, in getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way to get to mass adoption and raise awareness is only through stuff like that, in my mind. You got to get the big players involved, and I think the PayPal announcement is a huge positive development for the space.
Yep, definitely.
So what's next for you guys, John? Like, what's next on your roadmap? Anything in particular you're excited about?
We are, yeah. So I think there's quite a few things I think we're excited about. One is obviously really getting the game. So again, we've gotten the game announced. We've gotten the game into players' hands to test gameplay. We learned a lot, which every game goes through. We're getting close to getting the game into people's hands with the economy turned on, and then we'll start doing all these secondary market type tests, right? Whether it's in the game or it's on a web or it's in integrations with third party markets. We're really, really excited about that. And we have a couple of those we can't quite announce yet, but we do have some really big traditional companies that are kind of using us to get in the space. And we love that. We love that as a contribution as well. If we can bring big companies that might not already be in the blockchain space and they view us as kind of a safe bet because it's still done in real money. It's still, that type of thing. It's still kind of cleared with money they understand rather than tokens or all that. We think that's a great win. So we're excited to bring a lot of these things out. A lot of these things will be rolling out literally like every few weeks coming forward, or every few months coming forward. So I'd say the next 6 months for us is going to be just fun thing after fun thing, because we're bringing these concepts now, because we have this foundational game that we can use as a stage for these experiments, let's say. We're going to be able to bring a lot of those out. So that's exciting. We also are starting to talk to quite a few groups around the licensing side. I think that's going to be a great side of our business. And we haven't announced too much about that, but we're definitely heading down that path. And we've had just, 7 or 8 just amazing conversations of learning about how this can start affecting other big franchises out there. So that gets exciting as well.
Yeah. When did you start working on Mythical Games?
Yes, I started in 2018. So basically, right after I sold my company to Niantic, they bought my last company. As soon as we did that, I literally jumped right into this concept, and it's a concept I've been passionate about for a while. I mean, again, I think the thing that kind of woke me up to it was CryptoKitties. I mean, I've been in the blockchain, I've been trading cryptocurrencies. Yeah, I saw these things, these little cats out there, these little kind of 2D.
So CryptoKitties got you excited.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about it was really not. Was a couple things. One is that, we started looking at concepts around like if I were a free to play, we make free to play games, so you kind of understand the value to a consumer, and I'll spend $20-$30 in a free to play game, often just to kind of support the developer, or I want that one little item that'll make my game go a little bit more fluid, right? But that's kind of the extent of what I spend. I spend not a massive amount. I like to try and spend a little bits in a lot of games, right? But then suddenly these CryptoKitties came out, and suddenly I'm like, next thing I know, I have like $600 of CryptoKitties, and I literally am sitting there. I'm like, what just happened? Like that's not my personality. Like that's not what I would do. $600 of digital 2D art, right? And I was like, what is happening here? And that's when it really kind of clicked on me that the concept of ownership really kind of is important. It's important to the consumer's decision, because now it's just not that I just threw $600 away, and I wasn't spending $600 to try and flip it and make $2,000. But there's something about the idea that when you spend that $600, you have the option, right? Maybe I do make a profit on a few of them. Maybe I break even. Maybe I can just sell them a year from now at a loss because I just want to get something back, right? There's something about that tangible concept that really does change that. So that was why that really kind of hit me pretty early, and I'd been kind of obsessed with it, just kind of watching the space and eating up the space, and there wasn't a whole lot out there. So we started thinking about, like, I started talking to a co-founder, Rudy Koch. So we worked together at Activision, and then he went to Blizzard and was working on World of Warcraft while I was doing Seismic Games. And he hit me up and he's like, have you thought about this blockchain stuff? And I'm like, oh my God, let's talk, because it started just kind of hounding us around a lot of the concepts we've been wanting to do in games, and studios that want to do in games, blockchain and these concepts can make it way, way easier over time. So that was kind of the first step. And then I reached out to another great friend of mine named Jamie Jackson, he was another studio head at Activision, and kind of threw out the idea. And honestly, I think he had just moved from the UK to Seattle to kind of retire. I think he put out, Guitar Hero and DJ Hero, and he worked with me on a Skylanders game. And so we started talking to him, and he's like, God damn it, John, I think I'm out of retirement now. I think I'm coming back. So we kind of quickly put together a company and raised money to kind of put this concept together. So that's really kind of hit it from us, is we came about this idea from our industry experience, but just saying, oh my God, this could be amazing for the industry. Why don't we bring it into our industry rather than kind of trying to get our industry into the blockchain industry, if that makes sense, And that was really
yeah. Whenever you talk to someone and he says like, hey, I need to come out of retirement to start working on this, that's probably a good sign.
We've had a couple of them. Yeah, it's been really good. I think we really have had a couple of them. Our general counsel was Greg. He was formerly the GC at Activision Blizzard for like 12 years. I think he was the head of legal at Activision. So and he had worked with the founders of Oculus, and he definitely doesn't need to work again. But we started talking to him. He started helping us out, and finally he's like, you know what, I want to do this full time with you guys. So it's like, yeah, come on board. Let's do this. So we've been able to kind of get a lot of great people that just have tremendous knowledge of the industry because we're doing something different. Right. And I think I agree. Bringing somebody out of retirement is always a great sign that you're onto something. So that was really kind of how we started, and we've added just amazing people. We added Pete Hawley and as an executive recently, not recently, he's been here for a while now. So he was with Zynga and EA and Telltale and all these amazing companies, and he's made some of the most amazing games in the world. He joined us as our chief product officer. We had Jeff Poffenbarger, who was I think he's probably published more games than any of us. He did all the Tony Hawk games and he did all the Skylander games. And he was most recently at Oculus. He was the studio head at Oculus with Facebook, and we grabbed him and brought him back into it as our COO. So it's what's funny is we actually have kind of 4 former studio heads in one team, which, for a lot of people, that could be a recipe for disaster, having four studio heads in one company. But it's so beautiful for us because we all have kind of different areas of focus, yet we've all kind of shipped games, right? And we've all shipped a lot of games, a lot of big games. So it's really nice having kind of that expertise in our DNA and in our blood while we're all kind of building different parts of this organization.
So you've been working on Mythical Games now for close to 3 years. Curious for entrepreneurs listening to this, what has been maybe one unexpected learning? I mean, obviously you have significant experience, you've sold a company before, you know how to do this.
Yep.
Has there been anything that surprised you since you started working on Mythical Games? Any key takeaway that maybe you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had four previous startups before, and I'm sorry, this is my 4th startup I've had outside of working for Activision and other groups. But so this is kind of my 4th big startup that I've been working on. And what's interesting for us, I think the good thing for us right now is that almost every startup will have some big pivot point, right? They'll pivot the business model pretty greatly, and I think that's one thing we've actually been very lucky about is we haven't pivoted too much. The original vision of what we set out to do is still kind of getting out there and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but we haven't had to fully redirect quite yet. And that's you always kind of say, I always say kind of quite yet, because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring, right? As a startup, that's the whole startup life is you expect to pivot at some point, but things have been going really, really well for us. I think the biggest things for us, a couple things have been interesting. One is I think the one challenge is that gaming can be a little bit of a toxic community sometimes, and it's partly just because people are so passionate about these worlds, right? So you get a lot of big opinions, and it's just something you have to deal with. And what's really interesting too is the crypto crowd and the DeFi crowd and all that is a very, very opinionated crowd as well. So I think for us is trying to get those two crowds to play together is always a little challenging. So I think that's definitely taken a lot of deep breaths, trying to make sure we keep just kind of reiterating what our goals are and making sure that we can kind of settle between those. I think that's been interesting. I think the other one for us is the licensing side of the business. We've had some great conversations, and I can't mention who we're talking to yet, but we've had some great conversations with some of the biggest game companies out there. And honestly, we weren't expecting it. A lot of them have come to us partly because they kind of know who we are, and they're like, okay, what are you guys up to? It's partly that. And we start talking to them and they start brainstorming like, oh man, that could actually work for this title. But we didn't expect that to happen until clearly into 2021. And I think the reception about that's been really exciting. And I think for us, we've had to kind of think about, okay, well, how do we get that out a little bit sooner? Or how do we kind of twist our business model, our forecast to kind of adjust to that? The gaming industry moves really, really fast. So obviously we gotta kind of move fast with it, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. Has been really interesting to learn. For us, also getting into some of these partnerships with these big financial institutions. One, it was very flattering that they wanted to talk to us. And two, I think it was really interesting to see, just how much people are watching the blockchain space in general and the concept of ownership and what that can do. Particularly in gaming for us. But I think it's been just really, really fascinating watching and talking to as many people as we can, because there's something contagious about this, right? And I think we're trying to back some of them down and say, okay, we're not ready yet. But kind of putting that foundation, I think will result in some really cool stuff. So I think for us, it's been a little surprising in terms of how fast things have moved. That's probably the biggest one for us, honestly.
Yeah, things are moving so much faster these days, right? I mean, you see startups scaling so quickly, when you compare that to even, just 5-7 years ago. I mean, there's just so much more capital right now. The platforms are much better for you to scale on top of. And yeah, absolutely, things are moving much faster. And I guess on that note, curious for your take on fundraising. How much did you raise so far?
So we've announced we raised $35 million so far.
Okay.
And we have a couple other deals out there. We have some continuations of that round we haven't quite announced yet that might kick in the future here. But we've raised 35 million of venture capital, so it's a good amount of money for a startup for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Any best practices or any tips for entrepreneurs listening to this about how to approach fundraising and discussions
Yeah,
with investors?
definitely. So I think, honestly, how we started this. We've been a little lucky. One of my big investors, we happen to be an investor in Seismic Games, so they got a nice return out of my last deal. So that always helps a little bit. So I had a little bit of a history advantage on that one. I think the biggest things though that I've learned too is that especially if you have an area of expertise, lending that for free to VCs pays out in dividends in the future, and that's something I've been doing for quite a while with my career. Is that if I have knowledge of gaming, or obviously not insider trading or anything like that, but if I have some type of just expertise that I can lend to them, I'll do that for VCs for free, right? They can call me up, we'll talk through it, I'll give my feedback on it, and it starts building those relationships really early. So a couple things we did is that honestly, we raised money almost instantly after I sold my last company, because I had been working with a guy named Adam Struck, and he had Struck Capital, and I was just literally kind of a phone call for him. He could call me and say, "Hey, what do you think about this deal?" or "What do you think about this team?" And I would do that for free. And we've kind of built up a nice relationship there. So unfortunately, VC can be very networking based, right? And I think to me, the advice I always give is try and be out there. Don't always see like what can the VCs do for you, but try and be what can you do for the VCs as well, because it really does pay off big time later, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing I think is making sure you go in with a really strong team. And I think that's one thing we've done very well, is that we've been able to kind of pull together a really strong team, and that it makes all the difference in the world. That I think you hear this a lot from VCs, that they bet on the team first. So I think really making sure you surround yourself not just with full-time employees, but also your advisory team, right? And building up a breadth of knowledge, right? So we have one guy on our advisory. He is a game guy. We have a game entrepreneur. He's sold a couple companies in the game space. So that's the classic one. That's the go-to. But then we also have guys like we have an actor from The Walking Dead, and he's a great,
Really?
yeah, but he's one of I've known him for a long time, and we've talked, and a guy named Michael Cutlitz, he's one of our advisors, right? And he doesn't know as much about the game in workings, but he brings a lot of really interesting ideas to the table, right? And I love that. We have a guy that used to be the president of BAFTA. We have a lady that's a lady named Angela who is a big financial analyst, right? And she's now gotten into more NFTs and all that. So she's on our advisory panel. We have a guy that's he's written 5 Game of the Years, right? So again, not really necessarily directly focused on what we're doing, but just having that opinion group, I think matters a lot. And it's something that I like to do. I love diversity, obviously, in my team. I think we're very, very fortunate that we have, for gaming, we have a very diverse team, which is awesome. There's always better we can do, but it's something. Gaming has a tendency to be, not super diverse sometimes. And I think I really love that we've done that. But I also love diversity in investors and diversity in advisors and all that. So to me, that's the thing: is surround yourself with amazing people. And I hate to say it, but VCs watch that. They understand that, and they get your efforts around that. So to me, that's the key: is find the people that can really take things forward, and also don't be afraid to share in the cap table, let's say. I think that's one thing that a lot of people have. If you go in as a single founder and you're going to keep, try and keep 80% or 90% of the cap table, you're going to have problems long term. And I think it's much better to kind of have a strong team of people that you're kind of splitting that up with a little bit more. Which I know, again, it's just something I believe in, and I've always believed in that, because I think it comes back to pay itself again in dividends later.
Yeah, absolutely. Also completely agree on that last one. Oftentimes startups end up with binary outcomes, right? So 80-90% of zero is still zero, right?
That's exactly right. It's kind of a risk reward, right? I think it's actually more important to de-risk the business as much as you can than try and maximize the reward for yourself at the beginning, right? And I think it's just something I see it a lot. And honestly, it's I do some angel investing. I don't do a lot, but it is kind of a turnoff for me personally. Is that if you see that kind of single person that's going to run the show, I mean, come on, no one ever runs the show, right? That's just not how it works, right? And I think honestly, the key to our success of why we've been able to move is we have such talented people behind it, and we try to spread that love as best we can, right? So we have 3 co-founders, and we have an amazing executive team, and we have amazing employees overall. We're trying to give back as much as we can because that's really the way you win, And I agree, it's way better to have a small percentage of a big pie than a big percentage of zero, right? Which is where this often goes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having a strong team is just so crucial. Building a startup is a pretty lonely place to be at, right? I mean,
Exactly.
having a capable team in place and folks that you can brainstorm with, I mean, it's just so crucial. Crucial, for the founding team, forget about, in discussions with investors, which obviously it helps quite a bit as well. Question before we wrap up, John. How do you go about your day to day right now in running the business, during this pandemic? How did the pandemic impact the way you run the business? Is your team distributed? Did you fundraise over Zoom? Like any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple things on that. Yeah, a couple points on that. One is that one, we're very fortunate, to be real honest. I mean, the gaming industry has proven itself to be pretty recession resistant, let's say, not recession proof. I wouldn't say it's a recession proof business, but it is a little bit more recession resistant, right? So we are very, very fortunate in that aspect alone. The second piece, though, is that it does lend itself very well to being distributed. There's been certain aspects of our business that are really, really difficult. Getting user feedback early in the process. We used to do at Activision and other companies. We do behind glass, the double glass. Where you're watching a panel play the game or play concepts, and you can see that feedback and you can see that group.
Right.
We don't get that as well. We try to do that over Zoom, and it's been pretty good. But there's been certain aspects of that are tough. Obviously, I think you lose a lot of that, bouncing an idea real quick against somebody else. But tools like Slack, and I mean, obviously, everything's connected through G Suite these days, and we live in a pretty interconnected world. So I think we're pretty good about that. We still try and kind of mostly hire around our core locations, but we're now starting to pick up people, honestly, wherever. And what's really fascinating is we have well over half our employees now we've never met, which is definitely a first for me.
Wow.
But yeah, over half of our team has never met before.
You mean never met in person?
In person, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
how big is the team, by the way?
We're about 75 people right now. And then we have another 40 on the game side. So about 115 total. But like it's really crazy to where you feel like you know everybody super well. And you're like, wait a second, you're in Montreal or you're in New York or you're in Austin.
Crazy.
But so I think the tools are good. You do get a little Zoom fatigue. But like I said, we've been very fortunate. So I say we're going more distributed. Honestly, we don't have an office in LA anymore. We had an office, the lease expired in August, and we just kind of gave it up. And, there's always talks about when do we get another one, but it seems like every week we kind of push it off a little bit further, right? So we definitely want to have a central locations again, but it's just like, man, we're doing pretty well remotely. So I think it's getting used to that. And then making sure you check up on people. I think that's the biggest challenge for us. And we spend a lot of time with the HR team of like, just making sure. We do have a lot of single employees that might be living at home by themselves, right? How's their mental health? How do we kind of deal with that? So mental health has definitely become a bigger topic than we've ever had before, when you're in an office, and just terms of making sure people feel connected. And if, like I have a family, I'm very lucky. I have family and I have more pets than we know what to deal with. So my life, my home and life is very, very busy. But there's other people that just don't have that. So I think to me, that's the key, is just making sure you check up on people. And it matters, it really does matter to people when you're checking up and making sure that they're doing okay,
I think we're just starting to see the beginning of that over the coming months and certainly years, as teams become more distributed. The other side of that, I mean, obviously there's tons of advantages, but the other side of that is exactly what you just talked about, right? It's these mental health issues that I think are going to be more prominent moving forward, given that people don't meet as often in person.
I think also then that, you hear a lot of the big tech companies are like, oh, we'll work for home forever, and I think that, I mean, with some of the big companies that works, and I think it will work. I think what we'll see is there will be more and more fatigue. Now, I don't think that people are going to go back to the same work schedule, and we're even thinking about that right now. Jamie Jackson, our chief creative officer and co-founder, he's really thinking a lot in terms of like, he runs kind of he's up in Seattle, and he and Pete are up in Seattle kind of running that up there. And they're kind of looking at, okay, well, when people do decide to come back, whether it's 6 months or 9 months or a year or whenever we kind of start getting back into that experience, what will it be like? It'll be different, right? And maybe people only come in a couple days a week, or they only come in for half days. And I think we're trying to embrace that. We're trying to embrace that all the way down to how do we run an office. So there's things you got to definitely think about, and we don't know the answers yet, but we're starting to at least try and put our heads together in terms of like what do we think people are going to want when we return, right? So I think that's going to be key too, because I think it's going to be a different. I think for everybody in the world, returning to work. Well, I can't say that. I'm sorry. A lot of things will, unfortunately, will work exactly as they are now. But for a lot of businesses, especially in our space or in the tech space, when they return, it will be a different experience, and I think we got to embrace that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody knows at this point how the new normal is going to look like, other than it's probably going to be different than what we've known before this pandemic started.
Definitely.
But whether it's going to be fully distributed or something in between, or maybe closer to what it was before, like it's probably going to vary quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
So John, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights, and really enjoyed that discussion.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and I was very happy to talk, so thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode of Breakout Startups, I'd really appreciate it if you can rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. This only takes a few seconds and helps get the word out.